Hi, I'm Claire and this is my reading wrap-up for January 2017. I read 6 things in January, 4 of them were novels and 2 of them were novellas. I'm quite happy with that amount of reading in a month, especially since I enjoyed pretty much everything that I read this month. The lowest score that I gave out this month was a 3.5 star, which I gave out twice, but I also had 2 5-star reads, so that's a pretty good month as far as I'm concerned. The first thing that I read in January and also in the whole of 2017 was one of those 5-star reads, and it was Of Sorrow and Such by Angela Slater. This is a novella that came out from Tor.com Publishing. We follow Mistress Gideon, who is a small village witch doing small village witch things, preparing cures and potions for various ailments that people in the town have. And if they know that they have a witch in their midst, they are not in a hurry to make a fuss about that. Life goes on in this village until a rather foolish young woman is caught in the middle of shape-shifting, and basically the old men who run the town suddenly become aware that there are powers, or they cannot ignore the fact that there are powers afoot that they don't know and understand, and they start chasing witches. What I loved about this book was the fact that it is similar to what we know historically happened in our world when there were witch hunts and witch burnings, which is basically that any woman in town who was weird or lived alone or a bit too mouthy got caught into all of these proceedings. And there are so many complex, realistic, deeply messed up relationships for something so short to have such depth to it. I was really impressed. The second thing that I read this month was When a Scotch Ties the Knot by Tessa Dare. I read this one for the Sisterhood of the Traveling Paperbacks podcast, which is a book club podcast I've recently started with Kay, who is at KTLRay on Twitter, and Chelsea, who is at The Reading Outlaw here on YouTube. I'm not going to talk about this book too much because we have a full podcast coming out on it in mid-February. I'll leave a link to our Twitter and our website in the description box below. It's a Regency romance novel about a young woman called Maddie Gracechurch who has basically a phobia of social situations and crowds. She manages to get out of having to have a London season by making up a fake fiance for herself. She tells her family she's met this handsome Scottish captain on holiday and they fell madly in love and got engaged after a week of knowing each other, but he had to go back in the army, so you know that's why he's not here. And she maintains this pretense that saves her from having to go and socialize with people and find herself a husband by writing letters to this imaginary bloke. Years later, Maddie is living in a Scottish castle with her aunt. She's self-sufficient, making her living by drawing scientific illustrations of animals. And one day, out of the blue, this Scottish army captain turns up with a bunch of men from his unit and says that he is her long-lost fiance. He happens to have the same name as the name that she made up for her fake fiance many years ago. He's received all of her letters and he's come to marry her and live in her castle. It's a wonderful setup. There are things in this book that I absolutely loved, but there are also things that annoyed me a bunch. So this was my first 3.5 star reads of the month because there are things that I could have done without in this book, but it was also really funny and I enjoyed reading it. Then I finally got around to reading A Close and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This is a companion novel / sequel to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I can't really explain the plot of this too much without giving away a massive plot twist that happens at the end of the first book, but let's just say it is about Lovey, the ship's AI, who we met in A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it is also about a woman called Pepper, who is a friend to the crew in the first book. So we kind of meet Pepper, but she's not a main character in the first book, and she becomes a main character in this one. And it's about Lovey and Pepper and their relationship and their friendship, and also about Pepper's background and kind of how she came to be who she is now. I already did a full review of this book on my blog. I'll put a link to that in the description box below. I'm trying to also be vague and non-spoilery in the review, but it will give away a little bit more than what I just said. One thing I will say though is that I had some pacing issues with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I felt like even though the world building was great, it was a bit too episodic for my taste, and I didn't really have those issues at all with A Close and Common Orbit. It's a lot more of an intimate story. We have a dual timeline, so even though it can be slow at times, we get to jump from one timeline to another, and it maintained the interest level for me in that way. Next, I read Dusk or Dark or Dawn or Day by Shauna Maguire. This is a Tor.com publishing novella about a ghost called Jenna. Jenna died too soon. She has a debt of time to her name, and now she works to repay her debt by volunteering for a suicide prevention hotline. She lives her ghost life in New York City, and everything is fine until ghosts start to disappear. So I've already got a review of this book up on my blog, and I will leave a link to that in the description box below if you want to see my thoughts in more detail. Overall, I liked this book. I thought it was a good story and an interesting read, but I didn't fall in love with it, and I realize it's a bit unfair to say that I wish I'd liked it more, but Shauna Maguire is one of my favorite authors, and so whenever I read something of hers, I really, really hope that it's going to be the next thing of hers that I absolutely, absolutely adore, because basically, like, half of what she does I really like, and the other half I am obsessed with. So this fell more in the first category for me. I still would definitely recommend reading it. The next thing that I read was Martians Abroad by Carrie Vaughn. This is a YA sci-fi novel about a girl called Polly who is a Martian from Mars, and she wants to be a spaceship pilot when she grows up. She's working towards that, but all her plans are thwarted when her mother announces that she is sending Polly and her twin brother to an elite private boarding school on Earth. And Polly does not want to go to Earth. She's not interested, but she kind of has to go. And it's about Polly and her brother and their adventures on Earth. I received this book for review from Tor Books, and I've already got a review video up on the channel with a giveaway, which has now ended, and I've emailed the winner, so I will be mailing this book to them tomorrow. The review is still up on the channel, so I leave a link in the description box or a card on screen so that you can check it out if you're interested. And finally, at the end of the month, I started a whole bunch of books for Diversathon. I read pretty slowly, so most of them will be in my February wrap-up, but the one book that I finished in January for Diversathon was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This was the Diversathon group read for everybody who was participating in Diversathon to read all together. The novel follows Cora, a young black woman who is originally a slave on a plantation in the south of the US, and we follow Cora as she escapes her plantation via the Underground Railroad, which in this book is an actual railroad under the ground. As you would expect from a book about slavery and escaping slavery, it is a really, really brutal read. It is beautifully written, but it is a very violent and very angry book, of course with good reason. It is one thing to be studying things like slavery in school and to be aware that slavery was horrible and violent and brutal and all of those things. It is very different to be reading about it from the point of view of a character who was brought up in that system. We get a few different point of view characters in this book. It's mostly all in Cora's point of view, but there are small chunks of the book in different people's point of view, and it is very, very, very unsettling to be reading from the point of view of a slave catcher or, you know, a slave owner. But of course it felt absolutely right that the book should be unsettling and uncomfortable and brutal and violent. So I am really glad that I have read it, even though it wasn't the easiest of reads. I think it's definitely something that should be read and that should be confronted, even though it's really uncomfortable. It is something that we did in fairly recent history as well, so it's definitely not narrative that we should shy away from. So that's it. Those were the books that I read in January of 2017. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of those, if you have opinions about them, or of course if you have any recommendations for things that I should read based on what I talked about today. If you want to see more from me, you can check the sidebar right here for more videos. And if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button for new videos from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.